The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. Hello, hello. Looks like we might have another meeting going on right now. Let's see here. Drop in a chat if you can hear us. How's the audio sounding? People logged in. Testing. Let's see. Looks like we got a few attendees in here. Wait for some more people to come in. If you can hear us, let us know. Drop something in the chat box there. Testing, testing. Hello, hello. Can everybody see the screen okay? Can everybody hear us okay? How we doing? Okay, well, we're just going to roll right on through. I think we got everything going just fine. Welcome to our webinar today on how and when to pivot a link building campaign with Page One Power. My name is Jordan Yocum. I am the that would be Ben Dahlman, the operations analyst. I am the leads coordinator here at Page One Power. With me, I have Ben Dahlman, our operations analyst.
Hello.
And our strategy development specialist, Tim LeGore-Hand.
Hey.
And what we're discussing today is all the components that go into a link building campaign, how to monitor and analyze the results of your link building campaigns, and what actions to take and when based on the results that we found. So with that, keep up with this webinar on Twitter using the hashtag P1PWebinar. And I'm going to let Tim take it away as our strategy development specialist and talk about all the components that go into our link building strategies.
Thanks, Jordan. I want to start the webinar with this quote. I'm having an issue with the slide.
Let's see. There we go.
There we are. All right. So, without due diligence and research prior to a campaign, you will fall short of expectations. In order to see the benefits of a custom campaign, you'll need to dedicate time to research, analysis, testing, review, and reform. That quote comes from Andrew Dennis, a content marketing specialist at Page One Power. I wanted to begin with this quote because it talks about the consequences of not being prepared when conducting a link building campaign. While link building can feel intuitive when we're just matching a client's most linkable assets with target sites, planning is where we discover where most of our focus will be effectively spent and what options will be available to us over a long-term campaign. At Page One Power, we have a process in place for discovering where our efforts should take us. To prepare, we create plans called link building launch plans. While we typically create plans at the beginning of campaigns, they can be created whenever a link builder wants to assess where they are in their project and how their efforts have aligned with a client's goals. They are best used when treated as living documents, updated to stay in line with a business's shifting interests and search growth opportunities. In this part of the webinar, we'll cover each section of what we put together when creating a plan, and this starts with a summary. We start our plans with a summary of who our client is, what they do, and general notes about past work and expectations moving forward. Whether you're planning a campaign for a client or for your own site, it's useful to give yourself a bird's eye view to better understand how this campaign fits in line with your project's overall goals. This section can also be extremely helpful when onboarding link builders who may not be familiar with your project. A summary should provide context to your campaign. It should answer, who are we building links for, and where does this campaign fit with the client's overall objectives? The next section of a link building campaign plan should expand on these objectives. In this chapter of a plan, we pull in keyword research and any additional client requirements asked of our team, so our link builders can better understand how our methods will influence areas that matter most to the client. This section needs to touch on important keyword verticals and high-value landing pages. We determine important keywords in landing pages by metrics like current ranking, search volume, and how much organic search traffic a given page already sends to our domain. Priority pages are often decided based on the client's stated goals. Finally, this section broadly covers the tactics we'll be using based on our research team's findings. These tactics depend on what assets are available on our domain and how these assets match with potential target sites. We'll dig into these tactics more thoroughly in a later section of the plan, but for now, we simply want to provide a snapshot of where our campaign will look like in action to illustrate what our client needs and how we'll get there. In this next part of our plan, we explain some of the homework that goes into evaluating client assets. Now that we know what pages are of value to the client and what opportunities exist, we map out these pages in a chapter we call landing pages. We use this section to closely examine landing pages that we determine to be the most linkable on a client's site, along with pages we determine to be valuable based on search growth opportunity. The pages we select are often based on prior experience with types of assets. For example, we often recognize the value of assets like resource guides and infographics quickly because we've had success with them in the past. Our selection of landing pages can also be based on the analysis of prolifically linked pages from competing domains and having an understanding of what has been successful on our own domain in the past. By laying out a menu of options, so to speak, we make it easier to match the client's goals with what we can most reliably execute in our campaign. We can also include notes in this section about pages that may not necessarily be valid link assets, but provide additional value that can help link builders while conducting outreach, like contact information or About Us pages. We can also cover pages that might work as link assets with future on-page updates and optimization. Now that we know what the client needs and the pages that we need to focus on in order to reach those objectives, next we focus on some tactics we can use to begin our work. We call this next part of our plan link opportunities. Here we cover some specific site finding methods, such as search strings we can use or competitors we can backlink. With these methods, we can match link assets to target sites. This section should specifically illustrate how these sites are found and how outreach should be conducted with notes and sample templates. This section can be valuable when a project is being shared with multiple link builders who may want to coordinate so as to cover much ground possible, strategically speaking, while maintaining an overall focus on the client's objectives. Diversifying our strategies at the start of our campaign allows us to be more flexible and well-informed about what works when another pivot becomes necessary. Now that we've covered the groundwork of what our campaign will look like in practice, we end our reports with a section providing link builders a place to discover new angles as their campaign moves forward. This is accomplished by reviewing our competitors, whose own link building efforts can help us determine the most effective approaches in our given niche. Competitive analysis is a huge part of starting and executing a successful link building campaign. Comparing competing domains can reveal broad strategies to explore in the future and provide specific target sites we can reach out to in our own efforts. When deciding on what competitors to backlink or to include in this part, we check main organic search competitors through tools like SEMrush, and then we identify competitors for priority keywords and landing pages. This section is almost like a to-be-continued section for a strategy report. Since competitors will always be employing different strategies, it's very likely an initial report won't cover every good link building idea there is to explore. Our plans conclude with this set of competitors, along with sample backlink portfolios, so we can continue to explore new ideas through competitors' efforts in the future. To summarize, a link building plan should identify the client and their objectives, determine what our most relevant and effective link assets are for our campaign, illustrate how we can execute on those methods, and forecast future efforts in our campaign through competitive analysis.
And before we move on to the next section, I wanted to ask you about what's an average time it takes to build out these plans?
That can really vary depending on the client in question. If we're dealing with a new site which doesn't have many options to deal with, we may simply rely on whatever the best assets are. After all, we are a link building firm and we want to secure links, regardless if we have ideal assets. That's something we can work with in tandem with the content department. But really, that depends on the scope of the client. That can vary wildly.
Okay, good to know.
With a plan in place, we can more effectively determine what paths to take and evaluate which tactics work best. Whether you're just starting a campaign or pivoting in a new direction, a document like this can be extremely helpful for making sure your efforts are organized and are being spent where it matters. With all of this being said, planning a campaign takes a lot of work, and while it may be tempting to readjust a campaign with a business's constantly shifting priorities, you'll unlikely see much progress if you can't maintain focus. For search growth to happen, link builders need space to make it happen. We need time to determine if our tactics are effective in fostering higher keyword rankings and increased organic search growth, traffic growth. This leads to the next section of our webinar, which covers gauging the success of a campaign pivot, which I'll hand off to Ben.
All right, yeah, thanks, Tim. All right, so moving on, once we've gone through our plan and we've actually implemented these strategies in place, and we want to know more about how we've actually done and be able to forecast what we can do in the future, we need to figure out like where we've been and how successful we were. So that goes on to measuring success, which essentially is review and analysis. That contains things like measuring our efforts, challenging our previous hypothesis, and anticipating change. So what goes into actually measuring our efforts? Well, first we need to categorize the way we're going to measure things, and the best way to split this up is by segmentation, intensity, and time. Segmentation refers to the categories that define our input and allows for easy grouping during both testing and review. This will include things like our site finding method, target pages, templates, anything else like the landing pages Tim mentioned before, anything that we can use to differentiate between two different segments that we're looking at. Intensity or volume is always going to define our y-axis on a graph, while time is defined as the change in intensity and is always an x-axis. When looking at these visuals over time, it's important to understand that it's very difficult to look at a spreadsheet, and it's very difficult indeed to actually understand changes in time, especially if we can't see trends or slopes. This is a simple spreadsheet, I guess, of what we'd be looking at. Different site finding methods, different website types for a made-up project I called Space Dogs here. As we can see with the spreadsheet, it's not very easy to understand what's going on here. We can't see changes over time, and we just have a spreadsheet that gets really difficult to look at. When we pivot that out, we get more information like this, which becomes easier to understand, but still difficult to see what's going on over time. When we graph that, we get a little more of an understanding of actually what's happening, and that's why it's really important to visualize this information. Now, challenging our previous hypothesis. This means measuring intensity of input over time for all of our segmentation groups. We compare the results to the hypothesis from the campaign planning stage. We want to pay close attention to large changes in intensity across time in a segmentation group, our trend lines, and our difficulty in maintaining input intensity, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Anticipating change. For this, we want to look at patterns, direction, and slope of trend lines. By patterns, I mean we're looking for repeating behaviors. We can use that to predict what results will follow our current cycle. Using our graph from before, I've drawn some lines to identify the patterns that we're looking at here. We can see certain months we will start to build up over a course of 2 or 3 months and then drop down again before building up again. We're building up once again. On to trend lines. This means the line of best fit, and it really is the direction of change over time. The positive and negative slopes predict the results and define pivot points. Using the same graph, we can see a line drawn straight from the left to the right. Overall, we've actually gone down in this specific campaign over links per month, and that could help us define pivot points. To recap on our review, we want to measure our input and our output. We want to compare against our hypothesis from our strategy plan, and we want to visualize data to predict change. Once we've moved on, we can talk about our reasons to pivot. One category of reasons to pivot is what we'll call internal. Something that we look at are conversion rates on our link outreach. Again, this is a pivot table from before, and now we're looking at conversion rates of 2 different segmentation groups, A and B, over an 8-month vertical. When we graph this out, we start to see a little more about what's going on, but it's still a little difficult to understand when to pivot and what we should be doing. So then we draw our trend lines from before. As we can see, in May, we get a nice cross between the two trend lines and conversion rate, and that will give us an idea of when we can actually want to pivot our campaign. When the two trend lines cross, it means that there is a difference in conversion rates, and we actually want to go from one segmentation type to the next. Another internal reason would be diminishing opportunities, like I was mentioning before. If our input values that we've talked about and our target sites that we're going for are starting to diminish every month, even if our conversion rates stay the same, we need to pay attention to that. If the amount of link opportunities that we have available to us starts to diminish, we need to be ready to understand what the next pivot point would be and where to go from there. Moving on, we'll go to competitive analysis. And Tim, you want to take that?
Sure. As I covered in my section earlier, competitive analysis can help guide our tactics. While it's unlikely we'd pivot our entire campaign based on the success of one competitor, we definitely consider a partial shift if a competitor is earning tons of links using an asset similar to something we have at our disposal or could have if we're collaborating with a client's content team. While I guess we could debate whether this is an internal or external reason to pivot, I'd lean towards internal since this would be a determination that our team is making and not the client. On that note, though, our next section covers external reasons for pivoting, so I'll give the mic back to you.
Okay, so these are some of the internal reasons that we see pop up a lot as far as different reasons to pivot the campaign. These are all things that are within our control that we see through measuring our efforts. However, there are times when we have to pivot a campaign based on external factors. And those external factors could be a combination of things. One of them could be new goals from the client. So the point of contact that we have, orders were passed down to them where they might have a new product that they're going to launch. And that means that coming back to the link builders, we need to readjust our focus. We need to do some different keyword analysis. We need to change things up a little bit. And Tim, if we're going to do that in the middle of a campaign, what kind of effect does that have on the campaign itself and the strategies that we have in place?
You mean a pivot?
A pivot, for example, new goals from the client.
Yeah, that can really cause us to reset. It can cause us to go back and revisit the landing pages that we prioritized. We always have our internal reasons for selecting priority pages, whether it's because we see better fit as link assets or because we see greater opportunity than other pages. But for example, if a client has new pages or new business interests, it takes time to integrate that into a campaign. It takes time to do the research to figure out what competitors are doing with similar assets, what that introduces in terms of tactics to our campaign. We have to rediscover what assets we're dealing with. That can add a great deal of time, and I would expect to pretty severely impact at least the first month in that pivot.
Right. So when setting up a link building campaign, it's important to be as clear as possible with the most long-term goals that we have, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Other external reasons would be miscommunication. We've seen this a lot where the CEO passes down orders to a marketing manager who passes down to the SEO of the company, who then in turn explains that goal to us. And we go and implement what we assume the SEO wants. We gather that data, we build those links according to that plan that we put together, then we deliver it back to the client, and the client then presents it to their team internally to find out that that's not what was wanted in the first place. Mm-hmm. So occasionally there are those miscommunications that will cause us to pivot in the middle of a campaign. And similar to new goals, it's pretty detrimental to the campaign itself, but they are things that we can do. And like Tim was saying at the beginning, you want to treat your link building strategy as a living document, as something that is adaptable, that you can improve upon throughout the length of the campaign, and it's something that's really going to, you can get the most out of, knowing that's where that change can happen, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty much what we have covered so far as reasons to pivot. Ben, do you have anything else?
I think it's really important to note that you don't always want to change your strategy in the middle of a campaign just because you can. When things are going well, you want to stick with what's going well. You want to stick with what's been working for you. You really only want to pivot when there's a really like a big need to, I guess, when your conversion rates are going down or your link opportunities are drying up, or depending on the niche that you're in, sometimes different times of year can affect that. And you know that whatever asset that you have is just not going to work for the time of year that you're at. So you don't want to pivot, like I said, just for no reason. You want to have a very clear idea of what you're pivoting to and a reason for it, and make that very clear. And like Tim was saying, the living strategy plan, you want to go back to that and kind of understand what you were going for originally and what you want to go for now, and keep your goals very clear.
Absolutely. Tim, you have any further thoughts?
Well, I guess I just wanted to add that rarely is a link building plan built at the start of a website. Usually there's some precedents that we're building off of. It can be important to remember that getting organized, getting a plan together can happen at any point in your campaign. If you decide that you need to shift focus, you have that within you. You have that in your team. But it's important to remember that this isn't necessarily ground zero. We're working off of a client's previous efforts. We're extending that. And so I mean, it's not the end of the world if a pivot becomes necessary. After all, we do want to see results. But that's just a thought I wanted to float.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now we're going to get into the Q&A portion of our webinar here. It looks like we have one from Devin here. It says, should a link building response or should link building responses be taken into account when deciding whether or not to pivot a campaign? Great question, Devin.
Yeah, I can go ahead and field this one. I think definitely you really have to be able to take in all of your input and use that to really decide where you're going with the campaign. And outreach, when you're doing your outreach and you're getting responses, it is really important to understand what people are actually saying, not only to your asset that you're pitching, but their style of outreach, what they're kind of saying back to you. If you're getting a bunch of responses that are saying that this is not good information, you should listen to your audience. They're telling you what they want. I mean, for the most part, if they're saying that your information is outdated or that it's incorrect or something, you don't want to ignore that. You want to go forward, understand what you need to do to make things better, and adapt to like your current audience.
I think that feedback can be very valuable, considering that link builders are often working outside of their area of expertise. We can rely on that expertise if they decide that this is too elementary, this is outdated. That's valuable feedback, and we should definitely consider that.
Absolutely. We got another question here from Rob. You mentioned before different segments. Can you explain this in more depth?
Yeah, when I covered segmentation earlier, what I meant was just the different ways that we can essentially differentiate between our link building campaigns or our outreach styles. So that could cover a number of different topics. One could be the templates that we're using, such as like A/B testing and templates. We want to segment those out. We don't want to look at it as one big bucket. We want to know how A is doing and how B is doing. We can do the same for landing pages or target pages, even the different link types that we're going after.
All right. We got another question here from Andrew. Could seasonality affect when or why you pivot a link building campaign?
Do you guys want to? I think absolutely. I think when you're dealing with something, for example, like a scholarship promotion, it would be a disaster during like the holiday season when no one is in office. Yeah. That's just one of many, many examples when the time of year can deeply influence the success rate of any given tactic, and that should definitely be a factor when you're planning long term.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned it kind of last time too, that like you're saying, schools have times that they're out, and so summer or holidays is just not necessarily a good time. Other industries have similar times, and the more you kind of know about the assets that you're pitching and your audience, the better you can kind of understand that.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier diminishing opportunity, and I think that goes two ways. One, the actual sites that you are looking to outreach can diminish, but also you can have a window of time that's diminishing as well, and that would be something along the lines of seasonality. So you may only have a few months to get in a certain tactic before it's essentially either expired or out of season. So yeah, great question.
I wonder if we should have added seasonality to our external influences. That seems like quite a good option.
Yeah, definitely good.
Okay, we got another question here from Devin again. Let's see. Is it important to share data and key findings from the analysis of the data campaign findings with the link builders with the link builders building the links on a campaign?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is important to kind of share with your team this analysis, and the answer is like obviously yes. You want to know, I mean, you want everyone on the team to clearly know exactly what's going on, what's working, what isn't working. But it's obviously up to everyone to be really aware of what's happening, and take ownership of that, and look for things that they can do. Look for or not just the analysis, but also look for the different trends that we're talking about. Look for changes in any kind of variation between the number of links we're getting or conversion rate. It's important that the whole team is kind of aware of what's going on and is really on the same page. I think if you're not on the same page, then you can start to get into the miscommunication that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think understanding that data, making that data accessible for everyone on the team to grasp, can be a great motivator and inspiring focus on those objectives.
Absolutely. Well, what we're going to do now is wrap up the webinar. So what we'll do is we will shoot out a recording to everybody who registered. If you have any further questions, feel free to respond to the email that you get with the recording. Other than that, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk soon.